Welcome back. The House's version of the National Defense Authorization Act would codify the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program Authorization Act into law. It could change the way agencies have to use FedRAMP too. Tony Scott is CEO of the Tony Scott Group and former Chief Information Officer of the United States. Tony, thanks for coming on. What do you think the big deal is about the fact that this act is appearing in the House NDAA, Tony?
Well, there's three takeaways I have from this. The first one is it's great to see legislative recognition of this important issue, that is getting to the cloud faster for the government. As you know, it's been a struggle sometimes to get congressional recognition and enough awareness. So I think this helps that a lot. Secondly, if it passes into law, and this is a little bit for policy wonks only, but it allows OMB to write guidance in a different way than when it's just part of GSA's operating procedures. So I think that's really important. And then thirdly, and I think maybe one of the hidden benefits is it should allow other agencies to use authorizations that have been gotten by a different agency in a more seamless way. So, there's always downsides to things, but I think net, this is probably a good thing across the board.
People have argued, Tony, that this entire television program is for policy wonks only, so I don't think that number two is necessarily a shortcoming. The reciprocity issue, it strikes me, is the most important potential change here to the way FedRAMP could look different in the future as opposed to the past. Right. When GSA stood it up, Dave McClure was on my radio show years ago and said the point of this is to establish a floor, and so that agencies would know if something's FedRAMP certified, it reaches this level of security approval, and then agencies can add on to that. This strikes me that the goal is to get away from that, adding on stuff, and encourage agencies, or maybe push agencies, to only use what some other agency has already established. Am I reading that right?
I think it could be interpreted that way. I think in practice, you're going to see some of that. There's a fair amount of independence, in agencies, as you have come to know, I'm sure. And so I don't think that's going to not continue. I think the big programs will probably continue to go their own way. But I do think it's a big benefit for smaller agencies or smaller subsets of agencies that have been reluctant to take on what seemed like a big burden to them, and now it should be a lot easier.
Should it be a measure of ease for the bigger agencies, though? You rightfully say, you're correct, I've seen that these agencies really like their independence and they like to be able to choose their own levels of security and security elements. But is that really necessary at this point in time, Tony? Or should it be easier? Should agencies make it easier on themselves to choose to make these choices?
Well, I think one of the problems is that cybersecurity is a never-ending battle. And so whatever is established as FedRAMP is as good as yesterday's recognition of the problems of the day before. And as we all know, cyber threats continue to grow and people get creative and figure out new ways. So I agree with your earlier comment and Dave McClure that, this is probably just a floor, a minimum set of things, but we really need to keep making advances over time. And so I think you'll see agencies take additional steps on top of whatever's in FedRAMP.
If you were doing it, if you were writing the policy that was coming out of OMB, how would you write it differently for FedRAMP to be effective for an agency in 2022 or 2024? Or is the changing nature of the threat landscape such that that's not practical, that we have to think about now and the immediate future?
Well, one of the things that I think is badly needed, and this is across the public sector as well as the private sector, is continuing assessment of the threats. And so you really need to be constantly reevaluating and making those threats visible to senior management. So if I were to put anything in, it would be the requirement that the IT teams and the cybersecurity teams be required to give briefings to senior agency officials, not just on their cloud-borne threats, but also threats to their infrastructure and legacy applications. And I would make sure that that was a regular, maybe quarterly kind of exercise, because if you're not constantly looking at threat landscape and what today's actors are doing, you're never going to be on top of it.
We have about a minute left, Tony. The fact that you think that should be mandated seems to indicate to me that you think or know that it's not happening now and it needs to. I don't think anybody would disagree with you that it needs to. What do you think the reasons are that it's not happening now at this point in time? Because everybody knows how bad the cyber threat is.
I think it's inconsistent is the problem. I know that in some agencies it is taking place. In other agencies, it's not. And some of it has to do with CIO authorities, a topic we've talked a lot about, and Jerry Connolly has talked a lot about. But I would make these briefings mandatory and have all of senior management attend. And I think that goes a long way to creating the right initiatives at the most senior levels.
Tony Scott, thanks very much as always.
My pleasure. Great to see you.